Excusing my voice. As you heard, the negotiations have been very tough, and it's been very tough on my voice as well, but I will try to do my very best. I would actually start by saying that what we have seen today is a historic vote, because the European Union is at a crossroad. Either the political deadlock on migration will continue, or we will strive to find a common and a constructive way forward. And we could either choose to tackle this complex issue jointly, or we could see that member states will go on and act independently. And I think today the European Parliament took a responsibility to move forward, showing an ability to also find common ground. I think all our political groups have made compromises, knowing how important it is that we now have a strong position from the European Parliament in the upcoming negotiations with the Council. The main purpose of the file that I've been working on, the Asylum and Migration Management Regulation, is to reinforce mutual trust between member states. This is vital to the success of a joint European response. We have now voted in favor of a legal framework that achieves a fair balance between solidarity and responsibility. With this regulation, we establish a mechanism that provides true solidarity, but also allows flexible and voluntary contributions. A mechanism that is predictable, sustainable, and fair. The guidelines is, in general, increased cooperation between member states and more support from the Union. We propose a solidarity pool based on the projected annual solidarity needs, transformed into pledges provided by the member states. The member states that are considered to be under migratory pressure will have a fast-track access to the pool. The establishment of the solidarity pool is vital to ensure a speedy and well-prepared response to migratory pressure. Member states can contribute with relocation, but also with capacity building measures in the member states that is under pressure. This regulation also contains an updated version of the Dublin mechanism to enable an effective application of the rules on determining the member states responsible for examining an application for international protection. I think another important part in migratory management is the external dimension and the strengthening cooperation with third countries. In general, we need more cooperation in this field, and this regulation can help the European Union achieve that. But to sum it up, the European Parliament's commitments here today highlights now the urgency to move forward also in the Council. I'm proud of what we have achieved, and I would like to thank all the shadows and the other political group for the support. And I also must say that I have had great cooperation together with the rapporteurs that are on the stage together with me today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Oh. Is it me now?
Yeah.
Okay, then good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for attending this press point on this most relevant step forward that we have just made and signed by voting the main files of what we have called for years the new Migration and Asylum Pact. Let us have clear some preliminary ideas. First, we're not working on a legal vacuum here. There is such thing as a European asylum system. We have put it in place by a so-called asylum package. We have worked hard in order to see how it was implemented, but throughout the years it was only obvious that it was showing problems in its implementation and violations, increasingly so, of the law that was already in place. That is why we welcome President von der Leyen in the start out of this mandate of the European Parliament 2019, making her commitment that she would deliver a new Migration and Asylum Pact consisting of regulations, all regulations. That means binding law enacted by this European Parliament in the first place for all of the member states, and hence creating rights that the citizens may seek for redress before the judicial system in the member states, and also the foreigners, because let's face it, migration and asylum is about foreigners, not about European citizens. It is not the European citizens who migrate, it is not the European citizens who seek for asylum, it's someone else. It's foreigners who also are human beings and are entitled to claim for the redress to protect their fundamental rights when needed. Having said this, we have been well aware right from the outset of our work that we were intertwined, we were interconnected. This is meant to be a new system and a new balance between the main principles which are enshrined in the Treaty of Lisbon, namely in the Treaty of Functioning of the European Union, responsibility, which is shared responsibility, and solidarity, which has to be effective solidarity, credible solidarity, and the way we see it, binding solidarity, mandatory solidarity when needed. Having said this, let me also add that the regulation of which I have been the rapporteur, working hand by hand with the shadows, whom I respect and thank for their constructive work all the way to the very day in which we have voted this package today in the LIBE committee, is the crisis regulation. So first thing, let's have definitions clear. Crisis is not the ordinary situation. It's not the ordinary regime to respond to challenges related to migration and asylum. On the contrary, crisis is the ultimate scenario. As I have put it graphically more than once, crisis is not the letter A of the alphabet. It's kind of a letter Z of the alphabet. It should be the last resort. And what is a crisis? A crisis is when a member state claims to the Commission, calls to the Commission, seeking for special relief from the Commission because there has been an unexpected, massive, mass influx of arrivals in an external border of that member state, particularly after a search and rescue operation. It's familiar, is it not? It's a familiar situation. We have known it for years. Of course, we have seen that in the frontline member states. We have seen that time and again in Cyprus, Greece, Malta, Italy, Spain for sure, not only in the Mediterranean, but also in the Atlantic, through the Canarian route to the European Union. So the point is that at a certain situation, we call it crisis. It's massive and unexpected. And the consequence is that it renders non-functional the ordinary rules, which are the ones in charge of my colleagues here, or the files they have been working on hand by hand with my team, with my negotiating team, and with myself as rapporteur on the file. So the ordinary regime goes to these files, but the extraordinary regime that is emergency, that is the crisis situation. So clear definitions, and then clear governance of the crisis. The member state asks for the Commission to come with a solidarity answer. And that solidarity answer relies on what we call a solidarity pool. That is, that beforehand all the member states have some kind of a crisis preparedness and some solidarity tools at disposal to help the member state that declares itself in a situation of crisis. And in a week, the Commission decides a so-called delegated act. You know how it's like, a delegated act, which is binding also for the member states, by stating that the solidarity pool is sufficient, or, on the contrary, in 5 days, raising up the solidarity response by some solidarity additional help from the rest of the member states. And that means that the ordinary rules of the RAM, of qualifications, of the other files, which are component elements of these systems, are not functional anymore. We need some special kind of an answer. And that special kind of an answer, number one tool, is mandatory relocation. Mandatory relocation programs. We have worked real hard to give it a sound legal basis. Mandatory relocation programs. Then the second tool is the so-called prima facie approach. That means that certain categories of people, because of the country where they come from, because of a certain part of a country they come from, not the overall territory of the country, but a certain region which is extremely challenging or defying or dangerous for their personal integrity, then they are to be given, as to this country of origin or pertenance to a particular vulnerable group, prima facie recognition. within a month of the registration, determining whether the applicants fall within the categories of person, not an examining on the merits, not a full examination on the merits, just they fall into the categories of person, or they are somehow excluded from those categories of persons, including the security consideration. If it's a threat for the member state, then those will not be included in the prima facie international protection. And finally, the third pillar of the discussion we've had through these couple of years is the derogations. What do we mean by derogations? We mean that we have a special regime, which is the Regulation on Asylum and Migration Management, the RAM. We have a qualification, we have asylum procedure, and we have the screening. That is the ordinary regime. But then it takes a time extension to handle that special situation we call a crisis. And that means that we have been really engaged in setting a clear principle as to what extension it should have. First, the registration for the application shall be extended to 4 weeks. And that means reducing considerably the initial proposal by the Commission. Then the asylum and the return border procedure shall also be extended to 4 weeks. The initial proposal of the Commission was 8 weeks, and some members, legitimately so, they made the point that they would seek for 16 weeks of extension. We made it in 4 weeks of extension. And finally, we didn't allow scope border procedure exemptions or derogations. So we have struck the balance. And finally, we have some solidarity at sight. And that is a point I'm making here. Because, let's face it, how many million times we have heard, not only in the spot, in the situation, but also in the European Parliament, the theatrical claim for solidarity, the theatrical demand for solidarity, the theatrical complaint about solidarity not existing, of the lack of solidarity. Now we are putting a real tool for solidarity to be credible. The Delegated Act, which establishes relocation program, mandatory relocation programs, as a help, as a relief for those countries which happen to be facing a massive influx, sudden arrival, particularly after search and rescue operations. Naturally, that is a situation in which the so-called frontline member states leaning to the Mediterranean or to the Atlantic would be more likely to face, but they are not the only ones. It may also happen elsewhere. So we are putting up here some system, we are building a system that makes sense altogether, working altogether. And the prima facie, final point, is of course related to the qualifications directive, regulation, qualifications regulation, so it's not an invention. We have not made it up, the concept, it was already in place. So I'm making this point precisely because it shows that all the pieces of the Migration and Asylum Pact are intertwined, they are closely related. We are doing here a very cooperative and constructive effort to provide the member states actual EU law to face the kind of situations we have been arguing about for all too long. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thanks to my colleagues for all their explanations. I might start with a small point at the beginning. My colleagues already underlined how important it is that we as Parliament were able today to come up with compromises on all the files of the so-called new pact. And it was not easy because the starting point was that we all had totally different positions. And still, those different positions still exist. But that makes it even more important and valuable that we were able to come up with compromises on all the files. I do remember very well that in the past months we were criticized, especially me as a rapporteur on screening, that, hey, we are ready, we would like to start trialogues, but Parliament is not there with the screening regulation. That's true, we took our time, but it was for good reason, because we wanted to create the whole system on all the files that were proposed by the Commission. And now we are here. We as Parliament are ready to talk about all the files, to start the trialogues on all the files, but the Council is not there yet. So the Council still is not having a position on AMMR, on APR, on crisis. So we really encourage them to do their job and also come up with a position so that we can start the work together to create this system. Now, talking about screening, first of all, as a principle, this is not creating something totally new. All the checks that are now in the screening, yes, they are very concrete, prescribed, but in general, those checks are already possible at our external borders today. So they are more precisely described, but still they remain an instrument to be used at our external borders. I'm also happy that as a matter of principle, we keep the legal fiction combined with the border procedure in APR as an option for member states, but it should also be very clear that if a member state decides to use the border procedure, then this definitely will mean that they have to use the legal fiction of non-entry, meaning a person is on the ground of European Union, but is legally seen as not yet having entered European Union. Also, we have mandatory checks regarding health and vulnerability, so that at a very early stage we find out what additional support people might need. We also make sure that the rules from the earlier files, like, for example, the reception conditions, that is more or less ready, the file since 2016, do apply at least for those who indicate from the very beginning that they wish to apply for asylum. I'm also happy that we manage, different to the Commission proposal and totally different to some ideas from the Council, to not forget about a monitoring mechanism, but expand this mechanism. Why is it? Now, it's totally fine to have a monitoring system for the screening procedure itself. So to see what is happening once you are in the screening, how is the screening done, how are your rights respected? But that doesn't mean you have a chance to go into the screening. So therefore, we extended the monitoring mechanism from only the screening procedure to border surveillance, sending a clear signal that here still we have a problem with member states regarding respect for fundamental rights. We also made some clear rules, and I already talked about the checks that we do against different existing databases. We also wanted to make sure that the principle of not extending access rights to ever more people, that checks can be done mainly based on a hit-no-hit principle, and thus making sure that data are protected, but nevertheless, those who are doing the procedure can do their job. So we are here today with majority to decide on compromise on these files. Fabienne KELLER will now talk about her file. But once again, for me, it's important to underline that now it's on the Council to come up with their papers, because only deciding one or the other file will not lead to the result that we need to have an hopefully fully functioning asylum system. To have that, we need all the files, and therefore, once again, I'm putting pressure on the member states to come up with their positions.
Merci beaucoup, je vais m'exprimer en français. Merci beaucoup, chère Birgit SIPPEL, pour cette présentation du règlement screening. Après Tomas TOBÉ, qui a présenté le RAM, le successeur de Dublin, et notre président, Juan López Aguilar, Juan Fernando, qui sait se faire désirer, vous l'avez vu, qui nous a présenté le règlement Crisis. Moi aussi, je voudrais dire que c'est un moment décisif, un moment important. Ça fait 2 ans et demi que nous travaillons, chacun sur nos dossiers, mais aussi ensemble, puisqu'assez rapidement, nous sommes réunis entre rapporteurs et nous marquons notre volonté de faire avancer la réforme de l'asile et de la migration avec des solutions durables, réalistes, travaillées pour le long terme. nous, avec mon groupe, nous avons joué un rôle central. C'est notre job de groupe centriste pour la construction des compromis. Et je voudrais saluer les compromis équilibrés entre solidarité et responsabilité que nous avons ciselés chacun dans nos dossiers. Et comme l'a dit Birgit à l'instant, Thomas et Juan Fernando aussi, le Parlement tient ses engagements. Nous avons un accord à l'instant en commission sur chacun de ces 4 textes. Et maintenant, nous allons continuer à mettre en œuvre avec le Conseil la feuille de route. Donc c'est cet accord entre les 5 présidences qui a été mis en place au moment de la présidence française, tchèque, donc l'ambassadeur, hein, français, tchèque, suédois, belge et espagnol, et de notre côté, l'ensemble des rapporteurs. Nous avons déjà tenu 4 réunions, je crois, dans un bon esprit pour commencer à nous connaître, à exiger aussi ce travail transversal qui était évoqué à l'instant sur l'ensemble des textes, l'ensemble du pacte, sollicitant le Conseil pour qu'il puisse tenir ses engagements pour pouvoir démarrer les négociations avec le Conseil le plus rapidement possible. Alors j'en viens à mon dossier dont je suis le rapporteur, donc les procédures à la frontière. Je voudrais me réjouir de l'adoption des compromis. Je voudrais saluer quelques points. Des procédures d'asile d'abord plus harmonisées, plus efficaces dans l'Union européenne. Donc après le screening, les personnes demandeurs d'asile doivent être traitées de la même manière dans les 27 États membres avec les mêmes garanties. C'est l'objet de ce texte. La procédure à la frontière est révisée pour garantir une évaluation rapide des demandes d'asile pour les personnes qui ont peu de chances d'obtenir le statut de réfugié. Troisième caractéristique de ces compromis, une plus grande implication des agences de l'Union européenne pour fournir un soutien opérationnel et technique aux États membres dans la gestion des procédures d'asile. C'est en particulier le cas de l'agence de plein exercice désormais, l'agence de l'Union européenne pour l'asile et également de Frontex. Enfin, un contrôle des respects des droits fondamentaux est défini dans la procédure frontalière, c'est l'une de nos priorités. Les États membres devront mettre en place un mécanisme de contrôle indépendant pour s'assurer que la procédure respecte à tous les stades les droits fondamentaux et les droits procéduraux aussi des demandeurs. Enfin, je vais sortir de mon rapport et parler du rapport de Thomas sur lequel je suis shadow et dire que je voudrais le remercier, remercier tous mes collègues pour l'équilibre que nous avons trouvé entre solidarité et application des principes existants de Dublin, mais améliorés. Pas seulement le pays de première entrée, mais aussi le regroupement familial d'ailleurs élargi et le lien avec l'État membre. Donc un nouveau Dublin plus équilibré, plus respectueux des droits aussi des demandeurs. Donc sur l'ensemble des textes, des compromis qui d'ailleurs ont été en partie, notamment à la fin, négociés de manière transversale entre les textes, puisqu'il y a des liens bien sûr et on parle des mêmes demandeurs dans une perspective constructive de construire ensemble une politique européenne, vraiment européenne, de l'asile et de la migration. Et à ceux qui voudraient vous faire croire qu'il y a des solutions simples aux défis migratoires, nous opposons un travail construit dans la durée, réaliste, qui prépare bien la négociation à venir et finale, et nous l'espérons conclusive avec le Conseil. Je vous remercie.
Thank you the rapporteurs for these presentations. We'll give the floor to journalists for the first questions. Please, Leonora.
Hello, okay. I'm Leonora Vasquez from Euractiv. I have 2 questions. The first is about the contributing countries in terms of ordinary and extraordinary times. So a member state can decide then to be a contributing country, both in ordinary and extraordinary times. If they are not a contributing country in terms of relocation, how they contribute, like they contribute financially or, so this is the first question. And the second is on screening. I read on the text that in individual cases where required, the screening may include detention, subject to the relevant union national law regulating that matter. So I would like to know on the screening if you can provide an example of an individual case and the time of detention. Thank you.
Mr. TOBÉ.
Okay, I start with the first question. Thank you. I mean, what we're doing now is we are creating, as I said, a solidarity pool. We are stating that 80% of this solidarity pool should be relocation. 20% could be capacity building. And yes, in capacity building, that will be the needs of the member states. They will themselves identify the needs that they need in capacity building, and that can be very different. Yes, sometimes it could be financial support, but I think in many cases it will be other types of support on the ground that is needed in the member states. And this is the way that we are constructing it. So firsthand, the contributing member states will declare how they want to contribute. If that is not enough, then we will have the Solidarity Forum, and then we will have the pledges from the member states. And this is in all, because we think that what we need to do now is create increased cooperation between the member states, increased trust between the member states. And I think this is the way forward. And I do think that this new position from the Parliament is also hopefully something that we can also see support from the Council.
If I may add up, I will simply say that is the ordinary regime, the regulation on the asylum and migration management. But this is the extraordinary regime I refer to, the crisis situation. It means that the Commission is entitled to adopt via a delegated act that is binding for the member states, because it's a way to implement the general provisions of a piece of legislation which is already effective and enforced, binding mandatory solidarity responses. That means mandatory relocations. That is the extraordinary answer. Sure, that is embedded, very much linked with the work that we have carried out hand in hand with the regulation of which Tomas TOBÉ has been the rapporteur. But then in extraordinary situations, the answer is mandatory relocation programs adopted by a delegated act by the Commission. And if it is not sufficient, the Commission is also entitled, according to the crisis regulation, to adopt implementing acts to raise the solidarity response. First solidarity pool, additional solidarity response. So we are enhancing solidarity, but we're not doing it for the sake of nothing or out of the blue. We're talking of a very special, extraordinary emergency situation which has been declared as such by the Commission after the call of the Member State.
Coming back to the question of detention and screening, to be honest, we had a lot of debates about this issue. In the end, we decided that we should align our legislation with already existing legislation. And in this case, this is the link to RCD, the Reception Conditions Directive. So it's totally clear, if you look into the text, that detention always should be a matter of last resort. But on the other hand, the Reception Conditions Directive does not indicate any 100% exceptions. So we simply refer to the RCD to solve this situation of different debates around detention.
Yes, please.
I see more questions.
Thank you. Thomas Kutschka, Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung. I have a question or two questions to you, Mr. López Aguilar. My understanding is that you dropped one of the major innovations the Commission introduced into the pact, which was the return partnership concept. Could you please explain why you think that's not the way forward? And the second question, could you please explain why you think search and rescue situations are particular crises? I think in the past, most people arrived on shores in the thousands and 10,000s, arrived regularly. So normally with search and rescue, we have a few hundreds arriving at a time. And I wonder, why is that a particular crisis? Thank you.
Well, first of all, yes, we have somehow corrected the Commission's initial proposal, not only in that point, which is relevant, also in some other points. That is why I was not stressing the way we somehow overturned some of the initial suggestions by the Commission, which we didn't take on board. We didn't take on board. We did not accept them. I could illustrate, but it's all in the writing. Anyhow, the fact is that yes, we foresaw that the Commission initially came up with the idea of flexible solidarity, multiple tool solidarity, yes. Second, open-ended solidarity, whatever, in which there would be some possibilities of relocation, voluntary relocations, country volunteering for relocation programs, but there would also be the possibility of assisting those member states or the states of original transit under the label of capacity building, or even the member state in capacity building, how to handle them in those kind of situations of massive influx which renders non-functional the ordinary rules of asylum procedure, classification regulation, and the general regulation, which is the regulation on asylum and immigration management. But yes, we made a point by making it clear that in crisis, it takes relocation programs. And that is the choice in crisis. Of course, there is possibility for relocations in the regulation of which Tomas TOBÉ has been rapporteur, which is the general regime, which is the ordinary regime, which is the pillar, let's put it this way, the pillar of the European Common Asylum System. But when the European Common Asylum System is not applicable anymore because it's rendered dysfunctional or non-functional precisely because of the numbers and because of the drama of the situation, then it takes relocation programs to provide some relief to that member state. And yes, it takes search and rescue. Because yes, search and rescue can be some kind of a situation that from time to time it is headlines. You see that from time to time in the news. But it has happened also that some member states have faced continued throughout the time, sustained throughout the time, dramatic search and rescue operations in which that particular member state has been time and again claiming that that member state has been left on its own. Everybody else turning a blind eye on the drama. So search and rescue may be somehow an extraordinary situation, or even taking some NGO ships or something of the kind. But it can also be an organized, sustained search and rescue operation which has been financed by a country in which is taken so seriously that saving lives in a particular situation is a #1 priority for the policy making. That has been the case for Spain in the Canaries for months, but for months. It was not a search and rescue operation. It was 30,000 a year. Through years. And it happened again in 2021. In 2021, it's happened again. We've had thousands through years. And when I mean thousands, I mean thousands. It's not 1,400. No, it's 1,500 every weekend. And that is a situation in which it takes some solidarity, not to simply have them blocked for the sake of nothing in some kind of a harbor, or let it be a hotspot, we have called it for some time. Then it takes relocations. And actually, you know what? Spain has organized, according to its own account, solidarity relocation programs within Spain. That is why those thousands are not stuck in the island where they landed, or they were there disembarked in the first place. Be it Lanzarote, be it Gran Canaria, be it Tenerife, they're not stuck there because Spain organizes the relocation programs throughout the regions, throughout the autonomous communities in all of Spain. That is the kind of mechanism we would like to see in place, not as I insist, not as the ordinary tool, not as the first response, but as the ultimate response when needed, when actually needed, that we would like to see in place for the whole of the European Union, not only within a member state of the European Union. That is the point. Maybe some compliment?
Yeah.
Yes?
Another question? Yes.
Yes, yeah, I'm Anna Svensson from Europaportalen, and you mentioned the obligatory or mandatory relocation in the case of a crisis, and I'm wondering who will define whether or not it is a crisis.
The Commission, with the help of the relevant agencies, Asylum Agency, UNHCR, Fundamental Rights Agency. Asylum Agency, UNHCR mostly. The Commission is to take that decision.
And
assessing the situation, the actual situation.
And do you believe that this will be accepted by the member states?
Well, I know, I've been there. You know, I have been there before. I've been sitting in the Council of Ministers of Justice and Home Affairs as a representative of the European Parliament for the last 2 years, but I was a minister myself once. I know it's going to be tough. I know there are some governments who do not want to talk of it, but that is the job, and we will have to fight it through. And of course, I am well aware that at the end of the day, there will be some compromise that would not be my liking. I am accustomed to work like that. And certainly at the end of the day, there will be more compromises. That is what we call a trilogue. That is what we call a final unblocking of a file for it to be adopted with common accord by the Council and the European Parliament. But this is our negotiating mandate. This is our position. And that is, wow, that is a major achievement, believe me, that we have built up a pro-European majority in the European Parliament, providing solidarity, binding solidarity. That is a major step forward. That is a major step forward.
And let me also add some support to Juan Fernando, because I think what is important to understand is, yes, that is now the position of the Parliament when it comes to crisis. But let's be very clear here. The Parliament in RAM, we are taking a very pragmatic approach. We are now giving an opportunity also for Council to actually make a move, because we do see now that we are now offering the flexible solutions in RAM. But of course the Council need to understand that they also need to move. And I think the whole package that we present now is actually an opportunity for the Council to come closer to the European Parliament and also be more listening to the proposal that we also have in crisis.
I would like to come back to the concrete question if we believe that the member states will accept any decision or proposal from the Commission. To be very honest, what are we doing here? We are doing legislation. And if member states agree to that legislation, it would be ridiculous, unfortunately it happens every now and then, if those member states, after having decided at least by majority, do not stick what they have decided to. And I think we should make it very clear to the member states, if they are not willing to follow the rules that we are about to create, what will be the message to our citizens? Not only in the area of asylum and migration. If it's easy to decide a legislation, but then decide, oh no, in this case, I think I will not follow it, that's a disastrous signal to our citizens. And by the way, it's not a good signal with all our debates about the rule of law and democracy. So it's true, in the end, everything depends on the readiness of the member states to implement and enforce whatever we decide. But that should be the normal procedure, and we should remind everybody that this is the normal procedure.
I suggest we would take now a last question we get towards the end.
Yes, hi, Anne-Normand Désert from AFP. I have a question for Mr. Tobé. Can you please clarify in the RAM regulation, it is foreseen that the criteria of first entry does not apply in case of a disembarkation following a search and rescue operations. So what does it mean exactly? That there will be relocations, automatic relocations?
Yes.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. I think it's been extremely important for us to find a specific solution for arrivals by sea, and especially with disembarkation for search and rescue, because the situation that we see in the pressure on many member states, because what you need to understand is search and rescue is an international obligation to save lives. That is not a choice that you're gonna make. So what we are trying to do now is that we will create a fast track for relocation when it comes to search and rescue. So yes.
Thank you. Okay, we take maybe one last question, please.
Yes, Lorne Cook from the Associated Press. I just wanted to pick up on something that Ms. Sippel said before about you can't do this one file at a time. The member states are doing the easy stuff now because they can't agree on the hard things. Do you see them getting to the end of what they have to do before the term is out next year, based on this process, this procedure they're doing now?
Now, we talked about the fact, and I already indicated at the beginning, that we are ready on the whole proposal of the so-called new pact, but the Council is not. And we had ongoing debates with the Council, with the representatives of the current and upcoming presidencies, to make it very clear that if we are ready with our text in spring, which is now done, we give them additional time. We give them additional time to come up with their texts on AMMR, APR, and the crisis regulation before summer. And we also indicated that maybe if they can't do that and they miss the time, because that's the latest possible time to ensure that we have enough time for doing the trilogues on all the files. And if they are not in the position, like we were in the position, to come up with a text, we will have to rethink it over if you really want to decide on individual files, and that's the choice, and that's what the announcement we made also to the member states. They want to have a good procedure, they want to have the work done, to get something that we can say, okay, now we have an asylum system that we all are willing to work upon, but this needs to happen and the Council needs to deliver.
And if you allow me, I would gladly, if you spare an additional minute, share a thought with you. And that is, if there is such thing as a European Common Asylum System, it's because it is written and embedded in the Treaty of Functioning of the European Union, in the area of liberty, justice and security. So it's not a wishful thinking. It is actual mandate of the EU, and that treaty would have never entered into force if not because all of the member states ratified it. So now it's the time for them to be consistent with that principle. They agreed in the outset that there is no way we can manage migration or asylum on our national competences no more. No way. It won't work. It won't be effective, and it won't be European. It's got to be European and effective both. And for that, it takes a common system. That is the balance we're trying to strike here, the additional value we're trying to provide for the member states from our role as European lawmakers. That is the European Parliament. And the final thought is, yes, we know that for some time the Council has shown little interest in making progress, like showing some kind of self-accommodation to a situation of persevering blocking of the EU legislation. We have seen that for all too long they have somehow given up the very idea of putting in place a truly European migration and asylum system. But now we're putting pressure. That is why we first came with the package approach. Then we came with the roadmap. Then we involved all the presidencies to the very end of this mandate of the European Parliament. And it got started with the French presidency, then the Czech presidency, now the Swedish presidency. There will come the Spanish presidency that can be actually decisive because it's a semester, it's a full semester starting July the 1st, and then the Belgian presidency, which in coincidence with the elections for the European Parliament will not be complete as a useful time, but it's there. And all of the presidencies are committed to come to general approach. So to come to qualified majorities making their points. Once they have done that, then we sit together. We offer to come closer to them insofar as they come close to us. They come closer, we come closer. They compromise, we compromise. That is the way we do things here. So it won't be easy, but we have a very good start. Building up a sound, solid, pro-European majority to put in place an effective common European asylum system for good. Wow, that is a major achievement so far.
Alors, un élément sur votre question, mais permettez-moi, avant d'évoquer une réponse au règlement crisis, sur la question à quel moment elle sera déclenchée, la reconnaissance de crise. L'idée du règlement sur les procédures, c'est bien aussi de traiter des arrivées en nombre, plus rapidement, plus efficacement, notamment dès lors que les gens ont très peu de chances d'obtenir le statut de réfugié. Donc on ne va pas tout de suite grimper au règlement asile, on se dote aussi de procédures plus efficaces et respectueuses de l'ensemble des droits des demandeurs, mais plus efficaces. Et donc le règlement de crise est prévu en situation vraiment exceptionnelle. C'était un complément de réponse à votre question sur le déclenchement de la crise. Alors, est-ce que vous voyez que les États membres vont arriver à un accord? C'est la question centrale. Alors, par rapport à ce qui se passe aujourd'hui, ce qu'on vit aujourd'hui, l'idée c'est vraiment d'avoir des mesures plus européennes, donc plus efficaces pour tout le monde. Le pire, c'est bien les dublinés, un État membre qui examine, puis l'autre, et puis finalement il circule. Tout ça, c'est pas européen. Donc c'est des règles plus précises pour le screening, bien européenne, ensuite l'examen de la demande d'asile à la frontière ou pas, des relocations si il y a un nombre important de personnes qui arrivent. C'est un équilibre général. Et c'est celui-là que nous voulons proposer, c'est la proposition du Parlement, au Conseil, avec de la confiance, avec du travail des États membres les uns avec les autres, avec les agences qui aident à harmoniser, par exemple, le regard sur les pays d'origine. Cette question de l'analyse des demandes d'asile, je fais un rêve qu'il y ait une reconnaissance mutuelle de la gestion de cette demande, qu'on n'ait plus de demandes multiples en Europe, ainsi qu'on n'ait plus de circulation de demandeurs. Donc nous nous plaçons dans la position de pouvoir négocier en confiance et en coopération avec les États membres, conscients qu'eux, ils ont une responsabilité opérationnelle, qu'il y a des États membres qui ont des situations politiques qui sont différentes, qu'il y en a certains qui instrumentalisent la migration vis-à-vis de leurs électeurs, mais nous sommes dans notre coalition de gens constructifs, SND, Renew et IPP, nous voulons, si c'est possible, adjoindre d'autres voix, mais c'est le cœur de la coalition qui veut avancer et proposer ces solutions réalistes au Conseil. Nous nous sommes engagés à nouveau, tous ensemble, à conclure avant la fin du mandat parlementaire, en mai prochain, donc de manière plus opérationnelle dans les premiers mois de l'année prochaine. Donc il nous faut travailler maintenant, vite et bien. Le Parlement européen, tous ses rapporteurs, y sont prêts.
Okay. Thank you. So we will conclude this press conference. Thank you to the rapporteurs for this explanation. Thank you to all the journalists present and online.
We thank you for your attendance, for your questions. It's been a pleasure. Thank you all. Have a nice afternoon.
Thank you.